Hey, I'm in my house recording a video for you um, that answers our question of what is America to me, and kind of folds um, into that question an opportunity to introduce yourself to your classmates. Now, I just want to, I don't know, recognize a few things. That's Giraffe. That's my 4-year-old who will be 5 actually next week. It's kind of crazy. That's Giraffe. That's one of her dear friends. That's Mr. Robot. That's sort of a entryway to her bedroom back there. So I just didn't want to do this whole thing and have it seem as though I was unaware there was a huge giraffe in the background. All right. So, what is America to me? Well, that's an interesting question. So, here's the deal. I grew up in rural Arizona, a really small town, about the size of many of your high schools, like 3,000, 2,500 people, something like that. And I grew up in the 1980s, which was sort of the Reagan era. So rural Arizona, I mean, to say we were middle class is a joke. There were hardly any middle class people. Everybody was basically working class. I'll put it to you this way: one of the reasons I decided to become an educator in my life was the town I grew up in was so poor. The teachers were like rich, and signs that they were rich was like they drove like Toyotas and took like vacations like once a decade to like Australia or something. Um, Actually, there's just one person that went to Australia, but he seemed incredibly well off to me when I was in 6th grade. But anyway, so all of this is to say, I grew up in a time period at the end of the Cold War, in a very patriotic, sunny time. You can ask your parents if they remember, Reagan and It's Morning in America again, 1984, his reelection campaign. And that was sort of the foundation for my understanding of what is America. And so to me, as a child, America was represented to me as this very one dimensional, positive place, a beacon of hope and freedom, all of the ills of the past, whether it was slavery or civil rights or the genocide of indigenous people, a variety of extraordinarily heart wrenching, shocking events that many people all around the world are very familiar with as key elements of American history. Those things were stuff that we had either reconciled ourselves to or were moving on. It was morning in America again. And I didn't buy that. That was basically my issue. And it wasn't that I was like 7 and I was anti American or something. I just knew the story was incomplete. It just seemed as though there were these, even to my like little kid mind, there were threads that seemed to be loose. For example, I grew up right next to an American Indian reservation, the Yavapai Apache Nation. When I say right next to, I mean like here was my school, cross Main Street, down a block was the entryway to the reservation. And so I grew up with a lot of Native American friends, um, and I never ever went to the reservation. I was never invited. I was never encouraged to go, and it was bizarre to me because people that I played basketball with, some of my friends, lived in an ethnically homogenous space apart from the rest of the town, which was a mix of white people and Mexican American people. That seemed suspicious to me, let's just say. That seemed odd to me. Um, I also started to notice by the time I was 8 or 9 that white people tended to be richer, had more money, not just in my school but in TV. And then I started to notice that everybody in charge was white, but many of my friends were not white, and they seemed very smart. And I thought this was curious. Now, a lot of people when you hear someone like me talk about this, they're like, "Oh, great, he's a liberal." He's a liberal. He's anti-American. Here we're going to bash America. Wrong. Wrong. So my dad's family has been here since 1630, right? They were one of the original families of Boston. My family was involved in many different ways at the very beginning stages of this country. It's not like I'm, like Jefferson or Washington or something like that, but they're around. They're doing things. We've been part of the American story since basically the opening chapter of the American story. My grandfather, on my mother's side, was a vet. Her great uncle was a vet. They fought in the Second World War. They had a lot of pride in that. And I have this curious relationship with America where I am, especially when I'm traveling abroad, stubbornly defensive of America, and yet critical of America. Which, by the way, and we can talk about this sometime, was something that guys like Thomas Jefferson encouraged us to be, was to love your country, Jefferson was more into loving your state, but, loving your country, but also not loving it so much that you were blind about its room for growth. And that's sort of my approach. So what is America to me? America to me is this one-dimensional thing that somebody tried to sell to me. When I say somebody, I mean like my entire community and the culture of my upbringing outside of my home. Everything from, 4th of July parades to textbooks. That this one-dimensional thing that was glorious and great and moving forward perfectly the whole time. So America to me is that sales pitch that basically by the time I was like 10, I knew was pretty flawed, right? And I was not a super smart 10-year-old. Didn't wear any helmets, It was also the early 90s. Anyway. All of this is to say that regardless of the fact that I bailed on that sales pitch, I still fell in love with the place and fell in love with the possibility and consider myself pro-American, as it were. But I'm not, I have not committed myself in ignorance or in ideological faith to a really superficial narrative of American life that is probably deeply historically inaccurate and factually untrue, and in that way just sort of lazy. So what is America to me? America to me is a thing I'm still trying to work out exactly how to describe it to you. I'm looking at the little clock here, and it's been 8 minutes plus. And I teach this class called What is America, right? I'm your instructor. And I don't have a succinct answer to it. I should say, I have lots of answers to it, none of which are totally definitive. But America to me is this complicated place that I'm still trying to work out, that I'm both in love with and deeply, deeply critical of. And I also would say, though, that my criticality is also a sign of my affection for America. And my affection for America is not a sign for my ideological ingestation of an ideological orientation to this country that is historically and factually untrue. And a lot of that is rooted in who I am and where I'm from. So, what you need to do now is follow the instructions, capture something similar as to what I've done here in spirit, not necessarily in content, but in spirit. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Give me some reflections on what you think America is to you. No right or wrong answers. There's some additional items to follow about responding to one another's pieces. But this should get you started. I want to know what you think about America, and I want to know a little bit about who you are. So, from Mr. Robot, Giraffe, and my, bookshelf and guitars and stuff, welcome to this class. I'm really excited to have you here. This is hopefully going to be a rewarding experience for us both, but you in particular. See you soon.